As you can see on the screen, we're up to verse 24 of Hebrews 11, still dealing with Moses. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Obviously, when he was grown up and become an adult, Exodus 2 verse 11 refers to this. It just simply says, when Moses was grown. Stephen, in Acts chapter 7, when he was relating to this, he actually puts an age on it and says that Moses was 40. I'm not aware of there being any reference in the Old Testament record to that, to Moses being 40. So Stephen was obviously inspired to say that he was 40, or it was a Jewish tradition that he was 40. I prefer to think that he was under inspiration and that Moses was actually 40 years old when he, by faith, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So that for 40 years he was regarded, he was called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It's interesting, talking about years, it's interesting that Moses' life, because we know he lived to be 120 years old, and his life was divided up into 3 equal periods of 40 years each. As we've seen here, he was 40 when he decided to take a stand and reveal his true identity. And then he fled from Egypt and went over to Arabia in the district of Sinai, and he was there for 40 years. Then he came back into Egypt, delivered Israel, the Exodus took place, and the Exodus took 40 years. So it's interesting, you sort of wonder, was that specially, deliberately designed by God?
Absolutely.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
It seems a bit too much to be a coincidence in a way. And if so, you think, well, why? I know that in Scripture, 40 is a probation number. We know, the 40 years in the wilderness was a probation period for Israel. The 40 days that Jesus was in the wilderness being tested was a probation area. So it is sort of regarded as a probation period. And if so, it's interesting to consider that God put Moses through 3 40-year probation periods. And you look at those 3 periods, which are all quite different in their own way, but then that's typical of our experience in probation. The first 40 years for Moses were a breeze. I mean, he was living in the lap of luxury. He was regarded as Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, he was virtually heir to the throne in a way. He could have become, maybe, if things had happened naturally, he could have maybe become Pharaoh. So, I mean, there was a period of testing, and we know that God does test us in times of prosperity. God can learn a lot about us in times when life is a breeze, and when life is very prosperous, and that we can look at that first 40-year period in that particular light. Then when he had to flee from Egypt and he ended up in the backside of the wilderness, the absolute opposite. The life that he lived in was the absolute opposite to what his first 40 years were, and it wouldn't have been anywhere near as easy or lucrative, much harder life. And so that was and that often happens with us. I mean, you do hear of cases of Christians that are in the lap of luxury, and they're maybe in business, and really business is booming, and money's not at a premium or that, and then bang, there's a big change, and next thing you know, they're scraping for every cent. And if they're Christians, well then it's a testing. both periods are a testing time. And of course we all know about the final 40 years in the wilderness during the Exodus. He was tested there. I think I think one of the biggest tests for Moses in the last 40-year period was putting up with the gripes and the accusations and the threats of the people. You know, I mean, they got him down. We do read that he was the meekest man upon the earth, but I mean, every man has his limit of tolerance or of endurance, and God truly took Moses to the wire. And, you know, he got to the stage there where he got so frustrated, so cross, that when he was told to smite the rock, or to speak to the rock, he was angry at the, you know, at the situation that brought about that situation. And of course he smote the rock twice, didn't he? Yeah. It wasn't just once, he smote it twice, and he was only supposed to speak to it. And so God said, well, you know, because you failed, because it was what he said, must we, that is he and Aaron, must we provide you with water. And he didn't sanctify God. He didn't give God the glory, didn't give God the credit. It was a sad mistake, because really, of all people, Moses was the one to give God glory. And I personally feel that he wasn't really denigrating God or leaving God out of the picture. He just got a bit carried away, really. And afterwards, he probably really kicked himself, you know, especially when God spoke to him and says, well, sorry, mate, but you're not going into the land of promise. You're not taking Israel in. But I think there was more to it than that. Moses represented the law. And I think that, you know, God in his own subtle way was just showing the law can't take you into the law can't fulfill the promise of God. It's only grace that can do that. Anyway, 40 years he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I noticed the Greek word translated refused means to reject, to completely disown. It's actually the same word used in Acts 7:35, which refers to the Israelites who refused Moses, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us?" It's quite a strong word, and I think, you know, there's a bit of irony in this whole thing, because Moses refused to be an Egyptian, preferring to be an Israelite, and the Israelites refused to regard him as an Israelite, sent by God to deliver them from the Egyptians. You know, sometimes, as the saying goes, sometimes you just can't win. And it was rather ironical in a way. There may have been a formal statement made by Moses stating that he was not and didn't want to be regarded as Pharaoh's daughter. I don't know. I mean, she knew she was not his mother, not his true birth mother. And if Moses did in some way make a formal statement that he's not her daughter, her son, one can imagine her being disappointed, you know, considering what she did. I mean, she saved Moses, and I'm sure she loved him. I'm sure she would have been really it's something a lot of people don't think about, because the Bible never talks about it, but just sort of digging behind the scenes. 40 years, you know, for 40 years, she, you know, treated him as a son, and he, in a way, treated her as a mother. So if he made a formal statement that he's not her son, yeah, I can imagine her being surprised. I can imagine her being disappointed, but he may not. It may not mean that he actually made a formal statement. It could have been just his action, as we know, of killing that Egyptian taskmaster that indicated he was not pro-Egyptian. It could have been just that action of killing the Egyptian that virtually disowned his connection with the Egyptian. But so his action certainly would have caused Pharaoh to disown him and to want to kill him. And we know that in fact is why Moses fled. I wonder if somebody could read from Acts 7 verse 23 to 29. Acts 7 verse 23 to 29.
I've got it. When he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, you are brethren, why do you wrong one to another? But he that did his neighbour wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Will you kill me, as you did the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons.
The interesting thing is that what Stephen is saying there is that by killing that Egyptian with the sword, because I mean Moses being regarded as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, he had a sword. He carried it around with him, and he supposed that by killing that Egyptian, Israel would understand that he was going to deliver them. How? By the sword. By the sword. But I mean, how many Israelites had swords? But the thing is, they had bricks. I'm just trying to put myself in Moses' situation. We know that there were a lot of Israelites. There's a statement made in the Exodus that indicated that it's almost like there were as many of them as there were of the Egyptians, and so there was a numerical problem, and you think now Moses is thinking by killing that Egyptian with the sword, that would be a sign to the Israelites he's going to save them, he's going to deliver them. But like I say, they didn't have swords, but a lot of Egyptians would have had swords. And you think, well, now what's going on in Moses' mind? How does he think? How does he think well, he can't possibly think that he alone with his one sword is going to defeat the Egyptians. So he must assume that by killing that Egyptian, and the Israelites would realise he's going to deliver them, so they'll all rally behind him. They only had bricks, but like I say, you can do a lot of damage with a brick. And maybe that's the only way I can look at it. It's the only way that I can actually see what was in his mind. And so you can understand how Moses... You remember in the book of Esther, when Esther ended up getting chosen to be the king's wife, and Esther's uncle Mordecai, he said to her, God's in this, and you've been put in this position by God to do such and such and such and such, and so you could imagine Moses thinking, the same sort of thing, that we're now, I'm an Israelite, and all the Israelites are slaves, but I'm not. I'm in a very unique position here. This is amazing to think of who I am, and virtually standing at the right hand side of Pharaoh on the throne. God, God's in this, and it's like he's convinced himself through the circumstances that he has been providentially placed to save Israel. He knows that Israel, he would know from the promises to God, to Abraham, that Israel is going to be delivered, because God told Abraham that. And so he sees himself as the man. And it's like he's self-appointed himself. He's appointed himself before God has appointed him. See? And there's a danger in that. Sometimes God can have a person, male or female, he intends to appoint them for something, but he has his time. He has his time. And sometimes somebody can sense that God's going to appoint them, or they're going to do this, or going to do that, and they can sort of beat the gun and jump in too quickly and muck it up and blow it, because it's not the right time. God's time is always the perfect time, and that is how it seems to me. In refusing to be called Pharaoh's daughter, Moses is giving up a lot, isn't he? He's rejecting the glory and the honour, the riches, the treasures, the esteem, the highly exalted position that went, the status in Pharaoh's court that he could have actually attained to. But there's actually, I did read somewhere that there's no definite article in the phrase, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. There's no definite article. This makes it read, he refused to be called son of Pharaoh's daughter, making that expression, son of Pharaoh's daughter, a title, which could mean he's rejected the title, but not necessarily rejected Pharaoh's daughter herself. You get that? Yeah, I remember reading a commentary once that suggested that, and I liked that, because I didn't like to think of Moses virtually rejecting this woman who had saved him and brought him up and been a mother to him. I thought, that's a bit mean, that's a bit hard, and not really necessary. But so I rather like the idea that it was the title, the title that he was rejecting, not the woman herself, who I'm sure loved him and who mothered him all those years. It's generally, just out of interest, it's generally believed that Hatshepsut was the mother, that she was Pharaoh. Thutmose was the Pharaoh. There were three Thutmoses. That's where Moses, the name Moses comes from, Thutmose. The Hebrew is different. The Hebrew is Mosh. Is Mosh. So there you go. Moses' rejection of his position in Egypt and identification with Israel obviously wasn't due to the influence of his Egyptian stepmother, but his Israelite mother and father, and possibly his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam might have had something to do with it, because he had a lot of contact with them, as we know. You remember Pharaoh's daughter offered to pay Moses' real mother wages, So I'm not quite sure to what degree he was going backwards and forwards between Pharaoh's daughter and his true mother, but obviously he was doing that.
Would it be possible that because his mother was called in to suckle the child through the other maid, suggested that to the Queen, and the fact that she may have been called in to service with the child for a lot longer period than just until she weaned him, because he would have to be of an age where he would understand, because you can't imagine the Egyptians teaching him about his background.
No.
At all. There would have to be family contact of some description.
Yeah.
So when he was old enough to understand. It may be that she was kept on with him for quite a period of time.
Do you mean that Moses' mother might have been taken to the palace?
I think yes. Well, she suckled him. She was the one that was called in to get him to the stage of weaning.
Well, nothing's impossible. I've always thought that he was given to his mother where she was in her own home setting to succour him and to look after him.
Oh, you could be right, Barry. I'm not sure on that one.
No.
Yeah.
Well, either are possible, I suppose. Any ideas from anybody?
I just thought that it was in the palace.
Did you?
Yeah, and I'm not, clever about the topic. It's just what I thought.
Right.
And when you think that way, you can see God, just putting his mum with her in the lion's den as well, to be the guardian of the child growing
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
It's just how I sort
Right.
of saw it.
Yeah, well, who knows? To be honest, I've never ever thought of that. I've always just assumed that the child was given back to the mother where she was, in her home setting, and where his brother and sister was, and his father. But it's a moot point, I guess. The point is that God providentially arranged for his mother, his true mother, to have that intimate connection with him, and obviously to be able to influence him over the years, because how else would Moses have known who he truly was and what God's purpose was? I mean, they obviously not only let him know that he was their true member of their family, but also what the promises of God were to Abraham, and that led him into seeing himself as the deliverer. Moses' mother's name was Jochebed, of course, which means Yahweh will be honoured, and he certainly was through Moses as a result of his mother's faith and actions.
In Exodus 2, just in relation to what we were discussing, it says, Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go," and the maid went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give you wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it, and the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So it sounds like once the child was weaned, I guess, or at an age where he could sort of, be independent. Just coming back, Barry, you were talking about how, Moses is sort of assuming that, he's going to deliver Israel, and it reminded me of the principle in God in general, how there are a number of factors about the stuff we do. For example, you can want to do the right thing. You can have the right motive even, but is it God's timing?
Right, yeah.
And, we see with Moses, it was the right thing. I mean, God's people were in bondage. It was a good thing to want to deliver them from bondage. Secondly, his motive was right. He was wanting to be a servant, be a leader to God's people, because that was his heritage. But he didn't have the timing right.
Or the method.
Yeah, and that's the important thing. And even if you can have a couple of components right in the decision you want to make in God, if it's not God's timing, then it all just falls flat. And it's like that scripture says in Psalms 127, unless the Lord builds the house, you labour in vain. And the other thing, Barry, I was just thinking about when you mentioned that poor old Moses ended up sort of being rejected as an Egyptian, and then even rejected by his own people, sort of as it were in no man's land, with sort of no one to trust, and ends up just basically in the wilderness for 40 years. In a sense, I think we can identify with that from a church perspective. Christendom in general, the mainline churches, they don't want a bar of us. They don't want to call us brethren. We're a cult, according to them, and they've been very public about that. And yet, even the Christadelphians, from whom we've sort of come in our doctrine, and fair to say, 90-something% of our belief and our doctrines we would have in common with the Christadelphians. I mean, even their BASF, their statement of faith, you can go through that and tick off every single item. We have that much in common, yet we're not in fellowship. They don't want a bar of us either. And so in a sense, we can sort of identify with that feeling of sort of not being wanted by this group and not being wanted by that group. And as a consequence, we find ourselves as a little small group in a little small town in a little small country with very few people with whom to sort of be part of some big national organisation or international group, to have international fraternals with and all that. And yet, God is with us. You know, we're not saying that in pride or in cockiness. God is with us. We've been established by God. We're putting our stake in the sand, you know, that God's given us this. And as a result, we may sort of feel we're in the wilderness a bit, but God is still with us, and God's directing us, and you can see that in the blessings that we receive. You know, there's the blessings of fellowship with each other and the friendships we have. There's the blessings of the people we've met overseas that God has also called to a similar place. People have been rejected by this group, rejected by that group, but we're in fellowship with them. So, you know, because I know over the years we've discussed this from time to time, and to be fair, we lament a little bit, don't we? Because it would be nice to be sort of part of a bigger organisation, but often with the people of God, this is the way it was. Even Jesus, you know, he wasn't accepted by the Jewish leadership. He should have known better, because they knew the scriptures, and yet even his own disciples, when push came to shove, they fled. You know, no one wanted to stand by him. So, you know, we can't feel alone in that, and actually, hopefully we can take encouragement by the likes of Moses who went through the
So
same
it's interesting that when Moses was given the chance of doing it on his own, he said, "No, Lord, I can't speak well. I can't, you know." And of course, God all knew that was going to happen, and he said, "Aaron, your brother, you know, he can speak for you. He can do the talking." And so he brought in two, and of course, obviously Miriam was close and behind them, because she appears on the scene on a few occasions, and taking a leadership role. One was good and one was bad, but yeah, God started with a small, compact little group.
You can
It
imagine.
was God's work. It was everything was led by the Spirit of God.
You can imagine the disappointment if you can put yourself in Moses' position. Only God knows how long he was sort of musing over this thing, and I mean, seeing that Egyptian badly treating the Israelite wouldn't have been the first time.
No.
I mean, they're doing it all the time. You know, they've been doing it for years, and I would say Moses had this idea in his head what he was going to do, and he's going to deal with one of these guys, and that's going to be the sign. That's going to be the sign. I'm going to deliver. I'm the deliverer. You know, and you can imagine him thinking about this. I don't think he was praying about it. I don't think he was praying about it at that time, but he's been thinking about it, planning it, getting all keyed up to do this thing, and he does it. And there's this bad reaction from those that he was expecting to be overjoyed, you know, at what he's, you know, deliver him. Moses has got, you know,
from his brethren.
And the whole thing backfired badly. It just turned to custard. And I remember giving a talk. It was actually the Sunday after I had my 80th birthday celebration. And the reason I did it was because of Moses, you know, being 80 when he delivered Israel. But I remember looking at it and seeing things I'd never really thought of before, and I shared it. And I don't know how many of you remember it, but the thing that I saw that I never really appreciated before, that as a result of this effort backfiring on him, and he ends up fleeing for his life, getting out of Egypt and going to the backside of the wilderness, he actually gave up. He actually gave up on the idea of God delivering Israel. And so he was just there hanging around in the wilderness, just biding his time, waiting to die, really.
So you're not saying that he thought that God was not going to do it. He just decided, I ain't participating. I'm done hanging in. Is that what you're saying?
Well, he certainly decided that he wasn't going to be the man.
Yeah.
That you know, I mean, there I
finished.
was in the right position to do it,
Yeah.
and God didn't do it.
Yeah.
So he decided he wasn't the man, and I think, and I can't remember the details, but there was something there that indicated that he also thought it wasn't going to happen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that it wasn't going to happen. Yeah.
He needed that wilderness experience, though, didn't he, Barry?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He
Yeah.
had to go out to the wilderness.
Yeah.
He had to learn to be a shepherd.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd been brought up in the Egyptian household, you know, in a palace.
Yeah.
He wasn't tough or strong or what have you, although he may have been a reasonable, well-built young man. But he needed that to prepare him for the fact that he was going to shepherd Israel.
Yeah.
I think the biggest lesson Moses had to learn was that scripture we often quote from Zechariah.
Yeah.
It's not by might, that is, it's not by human might or human power, it's by God's Spirit
Amen.
that his work is done. And Moses, we know when God finally appeared to him in the flaming bush and told him that he was the man and that God wanted him to go back and deliver Egypt, he said, "Oh no, I can't. No, I can't. I can't speak. I'm not an orator, and I lack word power and all that." But we do read, and I think it might be in Acts chapter 7, that when he was in Egypt, he was mighty in word. He was actually mighty in word.
Yeah.
He was brought up under the best schooling in Egypt. And he was brought up almost like an heir to the throne.
Yeah.
So he came under the best education, and it is specifically stated he was mighty in word and indeed. But that 40 years in the wilderness, he lost all confidence in his own ability, you know, in his own physical strength, and his own verbal strength, and his own mental strength. He lost it all. And sometimes it's not until a person reaches the point where you've got to let go and let God, that God really gets on the go.
Right. What's interesting as well to remember is, as we've been reading here in Hebrews 11, so we've got Moses here. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, so he basically turns his back on Egypt, chooses rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. And as we've discussed, he was doing the right thing with the right motive, but his timing was wrong. It backfired, as we've discussed, badly. But it didn't stop him being a person of faith.
No.
Like Hebrews 11 doesn't sort of say, well, he started off believing, having faith, but he blew it. Oh, Moses, he blew it. It actually still credits him with having that faith, doesn't it? So, at the end of the day, there is quite a ray of sunshine, for those of us who may want to do the right thing with the right motive, but maybe don't do it in God's time. At least we're trying. At least in our hearts, we believe in God. We've got faith, don't we?
Right.
And he would have lived.
Yeah.
God was teaching him, otherwise God wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And he had to prepare his heart. Had to take it from a stony one to a flesh one, and all of these things were designed to do that.
Because I don't think there's any evidence that Moses was a meek man like he became during the first 40 years of his life.
Yeah.
I think the whole environment of Pharaoh's court and the high places of Egypt wouldn't have really engendered meekness. But it was the experience that God put him through that brought about that. God has his way of humbling people, and as we know, he only does work through humble people. To this man will I look, we read in Isaiah, to him who is of a humble and a contrite spirit, and who trembles at my word. And Moses was brought to that place.
I find it interesting that he's very knowledgeable because he's been raised in the Egyptian house and he's intelligent. He would have been thinking that where he is at this stage is very beneficial to his
Yeah.
privileged life,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But somewhere in his thinking, you know, he's thinking about his future reward, which causes him to reflect and then, you know, take a complete detour and go, you know, on the hardship road that he knows. Because
Yeah.
he's seen his brethren being mistreated for the last 40 years. I'm going to
Right.
become like one of them. It's not going to go easy anymore.
No.
You know? But somewhere in his mind, he was thinking, that's the better path.
Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So Moses, by faith, saw the Israelites as the people of God. That's what it's saying. They're not merely a race of slaves, as the Egyptians saw them, but a people with a divinely ordained destiny. I got a note here that word choosing, the tense of it means having chosen, like it was a decisive act to kill the Egyptian, not just a spur of the moment thing. It wasn't just an emotional, unpremeditated response, but it was something he had chosen to do.
Do you think he was angry?
No doubt, yeah.
Yeah.
I would think so, yeah.
Because often when somebody, you know, does that grievous thing, it can be in anger but still thought out. And for others it can be just thought out and done, and it wasn't anger, it was just, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, so that verse, the verse 24, as we've seen, it was by faith that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And knowing how serious this was, he would know the ramifications of it. And so it would certainly require faith, no question about that. Choosing to suffer affliction. I mean, we've already seen that, you know, in his head he was planning to deliver Israel, but it's almost like it's saying that he did also consider that it might backfire, and if it did, he would suffer affliction with the people of God, that he could end up being made a slave just like them, but he would rather that than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. We've seen in Acts 7 that Moses opposed his brethren, would have understood that God by his hand would deliver them, but of course they didn't, and it does seem that he did actually consider that it might backfire. Would you agree with that? I mean, you know, choosing to suffer affliction. I mean, if he really believed that his action of killing the Egyptian and taking up arms with the Israelites are going to defeat the Egyptians and get Israel out, well then, I don't think this being prepared to suffer affliction would sort of fit the same. Would fit the same, would it?
That statement in verse 25 is particularly true for people who, as adults, come to Christ and who have been part of the world for a long time, and you know, have had a long list of sins behind them, knowing that as well. I know this for myself. When I first made the decision, I for a long time thought about the fact that of the 400 or 500 people that I knew well, when I was working for the YMCA at the time, and I was involved with lots of groups, and I had lots of friends who I knew had nothing to do with Christianity. And that for me was the sort of thing that held me back for a wee while, because I knew I was going to lose all those friends
Right.
who I had a lot of time for. Most of them were good people, you know. But I knew that it was going to hurt to become a Christian. What I wasn't taking into account was the fact that those group of people that I got on well with and were considered friends, I was going to have a whole lot of new ones.
Right.
And the hard part of that is, like in a lot of the cases, when you join a church, you haven't chosen those people as your friends. And if you haven't chosen them, you've got to learn, once again, how to get on with them. Because Christ has chosen them,
Right.
not us. And well, not all those thoughts went through me. Quite a lot of them did.
Right.
And I'm sure it would be the same for a lot of others, especially as adults, when you've got a lot of background behind you that can hold you back from taking that last step. For you, John, it was evolution, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And creation that held you back.
Yeah.
Here's a hypothetical scenario. What if Moses hadn't taken the law into his own hands, just sat tight, waiting on God to take the initiative in his own time and his own way? From a natural point of view, one positive effect could be that Moses, in time, that is in 40 years' time, when he's 80-year-old, he could become Pharaoh.
Yeah.
If he just sat tight, he could have become Pharaoh, and having power and authority in Egypt,
Becomes
he
harder.
could have seen to it that all of Egypt gave Israel a happy farewell. He could have, you know what I mean?
And God wouldn't get the glory.
But then the negative effect is that God would not have had the opportunity to demonstrate his power.
Yeah.
You know, with all the signs and wonders that he poured out, and Moses would have got all the glory. See, God wouldn't have got the glory. Moses would have got the glory, and Moses wouldn't have had that spiritual development in his life that was necessary, that required the 40 years in the backside of the wilderness in Arabia.
Yeah.
So you know, I always like to, not that God needs justifying by us, but it's always nice to see God is justified in the way that things happen, because you can easily, if you're negative, you can easily turn it around and do the opposite and make it look like God, you know, didn't do it the best way, or that he didn't know what he was doing. But you can certainly see the wisdom. You can certainly see how many birds he killed with one stone, as it were, in the way that he did the whole thing. And of course Jesus likewise chose to suffer affliction rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin. Like Moses, he also was heir to a powerful monarch, God himself, and he could have attempted to take control if he wanted to. He could have attempted to deliver Israel from the Romans in his time. He was tempted to do that during his 40 days temptation in the wilderness, and even during his ministry, the people tried to make him king, didn't they? And remember, he took off.
Yeah.
He took off into the hills when they tried to do that. So Moses preferred to suffer affliction rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So you see, the Bible does agree there is pleasure in sin. It actually says that, but only for a season. It's a very temporary, a very fleeting thing. And so, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 18, we don't focus our attention on the things which can be seen, but on the things which are not seen. For the things which can be seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And there is that Psalm 16 verse 11, which says there are endless eternal pleasures at God's right hand. And these are the things which are not seen at the moment with the naked eye, but they can be seen by the eye of faith.
Yeah.
And the eye of faith is very powerful and has revolutionary effects on people's lives, that's for sure.
Just talking about, again, Barry, how, you know, the Moses 40 years in the wilderness was ordained by God. It was necessary. Guy, you started us off talking about the theme of being a survivor. And of course, you know, you can't be termed a survivor unless you've survived something.
Yep.
Right.
And I was just thinking about a synonym for that the Bible uses, and maybe it's overcomer,
Overcomer,
would be a very similar one.
Hmm.
You know, and in Revelation, you know, Jesus says to the churches there, doesn't he? He says, to he who overcomes will I grant to sit, etc., and have the crown of life and all the rewards. And thinking of Moses in that regard, if he hadn't had to survive and overcome the wilderness, because it was a foreign life to him, wasn't it? You know, growing up in the metropolis of Egypt versus the backside of the desert as a Bedouin. Totally foreign life.
Yeah.
He had to learn a whole new set of skills to survive that. But he became a survivor. He became an overcomer. And those skills, you know, you can look at the practical skills, you know, because they also had to wander in the wilderness for another 40 years, and those skills, you know, would have come in handy. But just notwithstanding that, from a spiritual perspective, he would have learnt so much as well about himself, about God and his sustenance, to the point where when he finally did lead the people, he had a much, much greater skill set
Yeah.
spiritually,
That's
most
right.
importantly. So he became a survivor. He
Yeah.
became an overcomer. How? By suffering hardship,
Yeah.
as it says there, suffering affliction,
Yeah.
going through the wilderness experience. And again, you know, we've got to take these lessons for ourselves. Do we sometimes go through a wilderness? You know, may it not be for 40 years, but
Yeah.
we still have spiritually some wilderness experiences. Our hopes, our plans, our dreams to do things in God don't come about. We have disappointments, we have trials, we lose things, you know, and so maybe we get bitter against God, whatever. Either way, we have wilderness experiences.
Right.
And we've got to learn from Moses that God is actually going to create in us the spirit of the overcomer through that.
Another aspect of that wilderness experience is quite obvious that his father-in-law was a wise man.
Yeah, Jethro, yeah, that's right.
I mean, he spent that time with Israel in the wilderness, saw what was going on, and gave, you know, and Moses accepted it as coming from God.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
When it says that choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, do you think that could imply Moses had enjoyed the pleasures of sin, but chose to turn his back on them
Yep.
and take a stand for God? In other words,
100%.
at the age of 40, he had a conversion, and the question is, what triggered that? Being a member of the royal family, I mean, he had access to a whole range of sinful carnal pleasures, not just the treasures of Egypt, the material treasures,
But the
but he
pleasures.
could have his choice of women, and like all could in those days, who were in such a high-ranking position in the superpower, you know, of the day. But if so, well, then it would mean that at the age of 40, he had an amazing conversion,
Yeah.
where he just turned his back on all those carnal, sensual pleasures that he had access to, along with all the physical wealth of gold and silver and all of that. Yeah.
Amen.
Anyway, our time is up, so we'll carry on with verse 26 next time.